Hello everyone, in this video we are going to learn about some amazing built-in methods available to us on the Promise object in JavaScript. So if you are a web developer, be sure to stick around. Now I'm going to open up my code sandbox editor. As you can see, I have opened up the main.js file. This is where we will do the examples. I'm going to start with explaining the configs. So every config item is going to be an array of objects where there are going to be two keys. The first one is settle after seconds, which means how much longer do the promise should take before resolving or rejecting. And the second argument is should reject, which means do we want the promise to reject or do we want it to resolve. I have created 4 items as such. The first one is, as you can see the name, all items will resolve. So both of these will resolve as the should reject is set to false. Second one is set items. Some items will reject, which means that they all will take 1 second to settle, but one of them, which is the second item, should reject. Similarly, the third example is going to be where we will reject both of the promises, and the fourth one is going to be where we will see how these methods will behave if the promises take different time to resolve, which is going to be a very common scenario in daily life. The function that we have created here is to generate an array of promises from this config. So we'll take the array of configs, we'll map it over, and we'll extract out the seconds and the should reject value, and then we are going to generate a new promise for each of them. The promise is going to settle after the number of seconds provided, and the basis for its rejection or its fulfillment is based on if the should reject parameter is passed as true or false. Now here we will call the function. So I have created 4 functions, one for each. The first one is going to be with all. So let's make this with all. As you can see, in this function we will discuss the Promise.all, and we'll take all the 4 examples discussed above. So the Promise.all, just a refresher, takes an array of promises and returns an array of result as a promise, right? Now the Promise.all will resolve if all of the underlying promises resolve. Otherwise it is going to throw the error of the first unresolved promise. So here I have the first scenario where we will create the promise array from the all items will resolve and console log it. The second one is going to be where we will reject some of the items. The third is where we will make all the items reject, and the fourth one is going to be where both of the items take different time to resolve. In the last one we are also going to log to the console the amount of seconds that it took to get here. Now heading towards the live example, as you can see, it's built-in promise methods, and I'm going to reload this page and we will see how it works. I'm going to change the filter to with all so that we only see the logs coming and starting with all. So yeah, the first one did pass, which means both of the items will resolve fine, because the first one has settle after 1 second and the should reject to set false. Now the second one fails at first index, which means the first one got resolved, but the second one, because we set it to should reject, it failed, and hence we got the log that the item at 1 index couldn't resolve. Similarly, in the third example, we had both of the items set to reject. So the first one rejected, which is at 0th index, And in the final one, we'll see that both of them resolved fine as provided in the config. But the whole Promise.all took 2 seconds to resolve because the longest of these both takes 2 seconds. So how the Promise.all works is it starts resolving all the promises at once, and then it takes the number of seconds which is the longest in the given array of promises. So in our case it was 2 seconds, hence it took 2 seconds. Now moving down, we'll have the second example. It's going to be with all settled. Let's see what it does. So we are going to do the same all 4 examples, but this time we are going to use Promise.allSettled. The allSettled method returns a single promise that resolves after all the given promises are settled, which means either they are fulfilled or they are rejected, with an array of objects that each describes the outcome of each promise. So let's see what it does. I'm going to save this code and head back here. I'm going to reload this page. So yeah, we are starting to get the console logs. So I'll start with the first one. So this time around you will see that we do not get an array of strings, but we get an array of objects in return. Each item has a status and a value set. The status is going to be fulfilled if the promise resolved fine, and it is going to be rejected if the promise could not resolve. So in our first example, both of the promises do resolve. In the second example, some have to fail, so let's see what the output is. The second one has status set to rejected, which means that the item at first index could not resolve, while the other two have the value and the status. The first item only has status and a reason key, not the value. So the reason is going to be the error or the argument that you pass to the reject call up here. So this is the reject and this is the resolve. Coming down, we see that in where all the promises were supposed to fail, it fails both of them with the given reason. And in the race condition as well, we'll see that it's going to be fulfilled in both of the cases, but it took 2 seconds because the longest of these two takes 2 seconds to resolve. So a good use case for Promise.allSettled is going to be where we want to see which all of the promises did settle and what was the cause of rejections for those who did not. And a good use case for Promise.all is going to be where we want all of them to resolve, or we want to throw an error if none of them or even one of them did not resolve. So a good example would be if you want to show an error based on 5 operations, you do not have to check for errors in all of them. 5 of them, you can just call Promise.all and collect the error whichever was thrown from either of the 5. The next example in our list is going to be Promise.any. It takes an array of promises, but in return it only sends the first fulfilled value. One thing to notice here is that Promise.any is only available on not version greater than 15. Now, it only returns the first fulfilled value, which means it is going to return the first item from the array which settles and is resolved. It is not going to return the one that are rejected. So let's see what happens. In our example, we see that the first array provided, the 0th index is resolved and it is returned as the final answer to the Promise.any call. In the second one, we see that the item with 0th index here, 0th index succeeded and it resolved, and hence we see that it resolved. But in the third example, you see that all of them were supposed to reject, and hence we get an aggregate error saying that the promises were rejected. Now in the fourth example, we see that the 0th index resolved, which means that it resolved the first one because it was supposed to take only 1 second while the other one was taking 2 seconds. That's why it resolved the whichever one is resolved earliest. So this is how the Promise.any works. A good use case for this is going to be if you are requesting the same resource from a different origins. So you can settle for the first one which is fulfilled. So you can make the request at the same time and then grab the one which is resolved at the earliest. The next example in our list is going to be Promise.race. It is very similar to Promise.any. The only difference is it will return the item even if it was rejected or resolved. In the Promise.any, we were getting the answer for only the promise that was resolved earliest, but in this one we'll get even if it gets rejected. So it will take the first item whichever settles, which means either it gets resolved or it gets rejected. It only cares about the settling of the promise, does not care about if it was resolved or rejected. So we are going to run the same examples on it. Let's see what the output is and how it is different. So let's see. So in Promise.race, you'll see that the first one has at 0th index, the second one also resolves with the 0th item. The third one, we get that the 0th item could not resolve. So yeah, in the Promise.any we got an aggregate error because both of them are not supposed to resolve. In this one we settle at the first one because it failed to resolve and it rejected. So we get the error for the first one only. In the race condition, or where we have two different times or two items taking different time, we see that it resolved to the item taking the least time, which is the first item. Even if you were to make it 2 and 1 and reload it, you will see that it still resolves for the item that takes the least amount of time. So yeah, it take 1 second and it resolved at the index number 1 this time. So this was about 4 amazing methods that are built into the promise object in JavaScript, and they are very helpful. One good use case for Promise.race is if you want to have a threshold set up for the promise to resolve. For example, if I have a network call which I want to reject if it takes longer than 5 seconds, what I can do is I can pass in the fetch call and I can pass the second item as the wait for 5 seconds. The function returns a promise which resolves after the given number of seconds, right? And what will happen is if this fetch call does not resolve in 5 seconds, this is going to reject, right? Because we are rejecting here after the given number of seconds. That's it for this video, guys. I hope you liked this video and it was helpful to you. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button. If you find my videos helpful, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss out on any new videos that I make. And I am going to attach the link to the code sandbox and the blog that I have written about this. Please go ahead and check it out and let me know if you have any questions. See you in the next one.